The manila folder slipped from my trembling fingers, legal documents scattering across my father's mahogany desk like fallen leaves. I had to read the words again, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. They weren't. My name is Chloe, and I just discovered I've been written out of my parents' will. Did you find the insurance papers? My mother Viviana's voice floated up from downstairs, making me jump. I'd offered to look for them while they were entertaining my brother Elijah and his latest business success. Not yet, I called back, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane of emotions threatening to tear me apart. I gathered the papers quickly, but one line kept jumping out at me. All assets to be transferred to Elijah Mackenzie. The sound of laughter drifted up from below. That familiar warm rumble of my father Edmund's chuckle mixing with Elijah's confident tone. The same sounds I'd grown up with, always feeling like an outsider looking in. Chloe? My best friend Leah's text lit up my phone. How's the family dinner going? I snapped a photo of the will and sent it to her. Her response was immediate. Holy shit, call me now. I'll be right down, I shouted to my family, slipping into the hallway bathroom. I pressed Leah's contact and held my breath. What the actual fuck? Leah's voice was a fierce whisper. When did they do this? The date shows last month, I replied, gripping the sink edge. Right after Elijah's promotion to CEO. While you were busy running your own successful business, the one you built from scratch? Apparently that doesn't count. I caught my reflection in the mirror, green eyes bright with unshed tears, dark hair falling from its careful arrangement. Mom's always made it clear that Elijah's achievements matter more. A knock at the door made me jump. Honey, my father's voice, your mother's serving dessert. Coming. I ended the call with Leah, splashed cold water on my face, and painted on my best smile. The dining room was a shrine to family success, all Elijah's, of course. His graduation photos, business awards, and newspaper clippings decorated the walls. My own achievements were relegated to a single family photo from my college graduation, tucked away in a corner. There you are, my mother said, serving tiramisu. Elijah was just telling us about his new development project. Fascinating, I managed, taking my seat. Did you tell them about the Anderson contract? I asked him, referring to the client he'd stolen from my consulting firm last month. Elijah's smile flickered. Ancient history, sis. We're focusing on the future now. Speaking of future, my mother interjected, Elijah's considering buying a house in the neighborhood. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have him closer? I stabbed my dessert with more force than necessary. Wonderful. You know, Chloe, my father said gently. You could move closer too. That apartment downtown must be getting cramped. My apartment suits me fine, I replied, thinking of my penthouse office space and the view of the city I'd earned through years of hard work that apparently meant nothing to them. Well, you might change your mind once you meet the right person, my mother added. Elijah, tell Chloe about that lovely lawyer you met at the country club. I pushed my chair back abruptly. I should go. Early meeting tomorrow. But you've barely touched your dessert, my mother protested. Lost my appetite. I grabbed my purse, kissed my father's cheek out of habit, and headed for the door. Chloe, Elijah called after me, don't forget the charity gala next week. The family should present a united front. I turned back, meeting his eyes. Wouldn't want to disappoint the family, would I? The drive home was a blur of streetlights and suppressed screams. I parked in my building's garage and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed. Leah again. Come over. I have wine and a shoulder to cry on. I started to type on my way when another text came through. This one from Valeria, my colleague in real estate development. Remember that conversation about property rights? Found something interesting. Call me when you can. I stared at the message, something clicking into place. The family home. My parents' pride and joy, the symbol of their perfect life with their perfect son. What if? Rain check on the wine. I texted Leah. I need to research something. Opening my laptop, I began to search property records, my hands steady now, driven by purpose rather than anger. If they thought they could write me out of the family legacy, they had another thing coming. I was done being the good daughter. It was time to show them exactly what I was worth. You're telling me the land under your parents' house isn't included in the property deed? Leah leaned forward on my office couch, wine glass forgotten in her hand. It's called a land lease, I explained, spreading the documents across my coffee table. Pretty common in the 1960s when the house was built. My grandfather only bought the house, not the land beneath it. And nobody owns the land now? The original lease company went bankrupt in the 90s. The land's been in legal limbo ever since. I tapped the property records on my screen. My parents probably don't even know. They just pay property taxes on the house itself. Leah's eyes widened. So theoretically, someone could buy the land right out from under them? Exactly. I closed my laptop with a satisfying click. Chloe. Leah set down her wine glass. That's deliciously evil. I love it. My phone buzzed. Valeria calling. I put her on speaker. You're not going to believe this, she said without preamble. I talked to my contact at the county assessor's office. The land is going up for public auction next month. Leah clapped her hands silently, mouthing, "Do it." What's the starting bid? I asked. That's the best part. It's ridiculously low because of the legal complications. Most developers won't touch it because of the existing structure. I remembered every dismissive comment my mother had ever made about my career choices. Send me the details. I want to be first in line. After hanging up, Leah poured more wine. Your mother's going to have a stroke when she finds out. If she finds out, I corrected, the purchase can be made through a shell company. They'll never know it's me. Speaking of your mother, Leah pulled up a social media post on her phone. Look what she shared yesterday. It was a photo from the country club, featuring Elijah shaking hands with some executives. The caption read, "So proud of my son's latest achievement, following in his father's footsteps perfectly." Funny, I said, taking a large sip of wine. She never shared anything about my company making the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Remember when she said your business was just a hobby at Christmas dinner? Right after Elijah announced his engagement to what's-her-name who lasted all of 3 months. I stood up, pacing. You know what really kills me? Dad used to be different. He used to come to all my debate competitions, my graduation speeches. Then one day, it's like he just gave up. Gave up what? Fighting Mom's narrative that Elijah was the golden child, and I was just there. My phone buzzed again. A text from my father. You left so quickly tonight. Everything okay? Speak of the devil, I muttered, showing Leah the message. Are you going to tell him about the will? What's the point? I tossed the phone aside. He signed it too. The next morning, I met Valeria at her office. She had more documents spread across her desk, post-its marking key pages. The auction's in 3 weeks, she said. I've already started the paperwork for your shell company. But Chloe, are you sure about this? Why wouldn't I be? Because once you own the land, you'll have real power over your family's home. That's heavy stuff. I thought about the family photos on the walls, all carefully arranged to showcase Elijah's path to success. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. There's something else. Valeria slid another document across the desk. Natasha Ray's development company has been sniffing around the area. If they find out about the auction, they won't, I said firmly. How much liquid capital do I need? As Valeria quoted figures, my phone lit up with a group text from my mother. Family dinner this Sunday. Elijah has exciting news to share. I bet he does, I murmured. What? Valeria looked up. Nothing. I signed the preliminary paperwork. Just family stuff. Send me the rest to review. Later that afternoon, I stood at my office window, looking out at the city skyline I'd worked so hard to be part of. My company logo glowed on a building 2 blocks away, proof that I wasn't just Elijah's little sister anymore. My phone buzzed with an email from Leah. Found this while cleaning. Attached was a photo from 10 years ago, me at my business launch party, beaming with pride. My father was there, arm around my shoulders, looking genuinely proud. My mother and Elijah were notably absent. I touched the screen, remembering that moment. Then I opened my banking app and started transferring funds for the auction. Game on! I whispered to my reflection in the window. Let's see how they like being powerless for a change. The auction room buzzed with quiet conversation as I adjusted my wig and glasses. Valeria sat beside me, both of us dressed in conservative business suits that would blend in with the other developers and investors. Lot 247 coming up, she whispered. Remember, let me do the bidding. You're just here to observe. I nodded, my heart pounding as the auctioneer cleared his throat. Next up, Lot 247, land parcel in the Heritage District, currently leased property with existing structure. A few heads turned our way, other developers probably wondering about the new faces in the crowd. I kept my expression neutral, even as I spotted Natasha Ray 3 rows ahead, her red power suit impossible to miss. The bidding started low, just as Valeria had predicted. A few half-hearted offers from the front row, nothing serious. Then Natasha's hand went up, doubling the price. Valeria waited 2 more bids before joining in. My palms were sweating as the numbers climbed. This was my entire savings, plus a business loan, all riding on the next few minutes. Going once at $850,000. The auctioneer called. Natasha turned around, scanning the room. Her eyes locked with mine for a moment, but the disguise held. She turned back, raised her paddle one last time. $900,000. Valeria looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod. 1.2 million, she called clearly. The room went silent. Natasha's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around again. 1.2 million, going once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 183. My hands were shaking as we signed the paperwork. Outside the auction house, Valeria finally broke into a grin. Congratulations! You now own the land under your family's house. My phone buzzed. Speaking of family, a text from Elijah. Missing you at Sunday dinner. Mom's making your favorite lasagna. Like hell it's my favorite, I muttered, remembering how she'd always made Elijah's preferred meat sauce instead of my vegetarian recipe. Ms. Mackenzie? A voice called from behind us. We turned to see Natasha Ray approaching, hand extended. I don't believe we've met. I'm Natasha Ray, Pinnacle Development. I kept my wig on but removed the glasses. No point hiding now. Chloe Mackenzie, pleasure. That was quite a bold move in there. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm curious about your plans for the property. I'm sure you are. I matched her smile. I'll have my office contact yours. Back at my office, I found my father waiting in the lobby. My stomach dropped. Did he somehow know already? Dad, what are you doing here? Can't a father visit his daughter at work? He looked around the modern space appreciatively. This is quite impressive, Chloe. Thanks, I said cautiously. What's really going on? He sighed, shoulders slumping. Your mother's worried about you. You've missed 3 Sunday dinners in a row. I've been busy. I led him to my office, closing the door. Running a successful business takes time. Oh, wait, that only counts when Elijah does it. That's not fair, Chloe. Isn't it? I pulled up the photo of the will on my phone, showing it to him. Want to talk about what's really not fair? The color drained from his face. Where did you get this? Does it matter? You signed it, Dad. You and Mom both decided I wasn't worth including. It's not that simple, he started. It never is with this family, is it? I turned to the window, fighting back tears. You should go. I have a meeting. Chloe, please, come to dinner on Sunday. Elijah's announcing his engagement. I spun back around. Again? What is this, number 4? Your mother really wants the whole family there. I'm sure she does. I thought of the property deed sitting in my briefcase. Fine, I'll be there. After he left, I called Leah. It's done. I own the land. Holy shit, she squealed. How does it feel? Terrifying, exciting. I don't know. I picked up the deed. Elijah's announcing another engagement on Sunday. Please tell me you're going. The timing is perfect. Not yet, I said, thinking of Natasha's calculating smile at the auction. I need all my pieces in place first. My phone dinged with an email from Natasha Ray, interested in discussing a potential partnership regarding the Heritage District property. Dinner tomorrow? I smiled, remembering every dismissive comment, every missed achievement, every time I was pushed aside for Elijah. The land deed felt heavy in my hands, heavy with possibility, with power, with revenge. Game on indeed, I whispered, and began typing my reply to Natasha. $15 million? I set down my wine glass carefully, studying Natasha's face across the restaurant table. That's quite an offer for a simple land lease. Simple? Natasha laughed. We both know there's nothing simple about that property, Chloe, especially considering who lives there. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. You've done your homework. Of course I have, just like you did your homework before the auction. She leaned forward. The question is, what's your real end game here? Maybe I just like real estate investments. Please, Natasha signaled for more wine. You borrowed against your company to buy land under your parents' house. This is personal. I maintained eye contact as I took another sip of wine. And what if it is? Then we might be able to help each other. She pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. Take a look at our development plans for the area. The renderings showed a modern mixed-use complex, retail, offices, luxury condos, right where my parents' house currently stood. You want to demolish the house, I said flatly. We want to revitalize the neighborhood. Your parents would be generously compensated, of course. My phone buzzed. A text from Elijah. Where are you? Family meeting at the house. Important news. Excuse me, I said to Natasha, stepping away from the table to call him. What's so urgent? I asked when he answered. Mom and Dad are selling the house. My stomach dropped. What? Some developers been making offers in the neighborhood. They think it's time to downsize anyway. I glanced back at Natasha, who was calmly sipping her wine. When did they decide this? Just now. Mom's already talking about condos in Florida. Get over here. We need to discuss the details. 20 minutes later, I walked into my parents' living room to find them gathered around the coffee table. Real estate listings spread everywhere. There you are. My mother barely looked up. Elijah's found the perfect place in Palm Beach. We could be neighbors. You're moving to Florida too? I asked him. Julia loves the ocean. He wrapped an arm around his fiancée, the latest one, whom I'd met exactly twice. And what about this house? I asked carefully. All the memories here? Oh, honey. My mother patted my hand condescendingly. Sometimes we have to let go of the past. Besides, the offer from Pinnacle Development is too good to refuse. You've already talked to them? I fought to keep my voice steady. Their representative reached out last week, my father said. Very professional. They're offering well above market value. Of course they are, I muttered. What was that? Nothing. I pulled out my phone, texting Valeria. They're selling. Need to move faster. Chloe, dear, my mother's voice cut through my thoughts. While you're here, we should discuss the will. My head snapped up. What about it? Well, with the house being sold, We'll need to make some adjustments. Elijah, as executor? Actually, I cut in, standing up. I need to go. I have a dinner meeting. More important than family? My mother's disapproval was palpable. You tell me, Mom. You're the expert on what's important in this family. I drove straight back to the restaurant, where Natasha was still waiting. You knew, I accused, sliding into my seat. You knew they were planning to sell. I knew they were considering it. She smiled. Changes things, doesn't it? How so? Well, now you have a choice. You can either reveal your ownership and stop the sale, probably destroying your family relationships in the process. She paused, swirling her wine. Or you can partner with me, make a healthy profit, and let them believe they made the choice themselves. I thought about my mother's dismissive pat, Elijah's casual announcement about Florida, my father's quiet acceptance of it all. What exactly are you proposing? Natasha's smile widened. Let them sign the sale agreement. Once that's done, we reveal that the land was separately owned. They'll be embarrassed, of course, but by then it won't matter. The house will be sold. They'll have their money, and you'll have your satisfaction. And you get your development. Everybody wins. She raised her glass. What do you say? My phone buzzed again. A text from Leah. How's Operation Revenge going? I looked at Natasha's expectant face, then at the development plans on the tablet. The house I grew up in would be gone, replaced by steel and glass. My childhood home, erased like so many of my achievements, had been erased from family conversations. I need time to think, I said finally. Don't take too long. Natasha stood, dropping her business card on the table. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. I stayed at the table long after she left, staring at the card and wondering when revenge had gotten so complicated. Your mother did what? Leah nearly dropped her coffee cup as we sat in my office the next morning. Invited the Pinnacle Development team to Sunday dinner, I said, pacing, to discuss the future of the neighborhood over pot roast. The same dinner where Elijah's announcing his engagement? Apparently, it's going to be quite the event. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my father. Mom's invited half the country club. Are you going? Before I could answer, Valeria burst in, waving a document. We have a problem. Natasha Ray just filed for expedited development permits. She can't do that without owning the property, I said. She's listed your parents' signed intent to sell as preliminary documentation. Valeria spread the papers across my desk. She's moving fast, Chloe. My phone buzzed again. My father. This time, I answered. Chloe, thank God, he said. Can you meet me for coffee? Alone? 20 minutes later, I found him at our old favorite cafe, the one we used to visit after my debate competitions in high school. He looked older, tired. I found something in the attic, he said without preamble, sliding a folder across the table, while looking for papers for the house sale. Inside were newspaper clippings, every article ever written about my business achievements, carefully preserved, my Forbes feature, the Chamber of Commerce award, even the small write-up from my first client signing. You kept these? Of course I did. He stirred his coffee absently. I know I haven't always stood up for you, Chloe. Your mother, she has strong ideas about family legacy. You mean about Elijah's legacy? I should have fought harder. He looked up, eyes wet. The will? It wasn't my idea. But you signed it? I did, and I've regretted it every day since. He pulled out another document. That's why I had this drawn up last week. It was a new will, splitting everything equally between Elijah and me. Dad, I haven't shown your mother yet, or Elijah. He reached for my hand. But before I do, there's something else you should know about the house sale. My heart stopped. What about it? Tessa, our lawyer, she found some irregularities in the property records. Something about the land lease. The cafe door chimed, and my mother's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Edmund, what are you doing here? We both turned to see her standing there, Elijah at her side. Having coffee with my daughter, my father said firmly. Would you like to join us? Actually, my mother said, sliding into a chair, we need to discuss Sunday's dinner. The Pinnacle team confirmed, and Elijah has his big announcement. I know about the will, I blurted out. The cafe went silent. My mother's face paled, then hardened. How dare you go through our private papers, she started. How dare you write me out of the family, I shot back. It's not like that, Elijah interjected. The family business. What family business? I laughed bitterly. My company is more successful than yours, but that never mattered, did it? Chloe, my mother's voice was ice. You're making a scene. No, Mother, I'm finally speaking up. I pulled out my phone, pulling up the property records. And since we're all here, there's something you should know about the house sale. What about it? Elijah leaned forward. My finger hovered over the screen, ready to show them everything. Then I saw my father's face, the hope there, the new will in his pocket, the carefully preserved clippings. My phone buzzed. Natasha, time's running out. Do we have a deal? I looked at my family, my mother's rigid disapproval, Elijah's practiced concern, my father's quiet guilt. Years of feeling invisible, of being pushed aside, of watching my achievements be dismissed. The land lease, I said finally. You might want to have Tessa look into it before signing anything with Pinnacle. Why? My mother demanded. Just trust me on this. I stood up, gathering my things. Oh, and Mother, I'll be at dinner on Sunday. I have an announcement of my own to make. Outside, I called Natasha. I've made my decision, I said, watching my family through the cafe window. My father was pulling out the new will, my mother's face growing stormy as she read it. And, Natasha asked, let's talk about those development plans again, but this time we do it my way. I hung up and texted Leah. It's time. Sunday dinner is going to be interesting. The response was immediate. Want me there for backup? I watched my mother storm out of the cafe, Elijah trailing behind her, my father sitting alone with his head in his hands. Yes, I typed back. Bring popcorn. Sunday dinner felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. My mother had outdone herself. Crystal glasses, fine china, fresh flowers everywhere. The Pinnacle development team sat at one end of the dining table, Natasha Ray looking perfectly at ease as she chatted with Elijah and his fiancée Julia. Chloe, my mother's voice was honey-sweet for the guests. Would you help me in the kitchen? I followed her, catching Leah's supportive wink from her seat next to my father. What is she doing here? My mother hissed once we were alone, gesturing toward Leah. She's my +1. I started arranging appetizers on a silver tray. Like Julia is Elijah's. That's different. Julia is family. For now, I muttered, thinking of Elijah's previous 3 engagements. I heard that. She grabbed my arm. Don't you dare make a scene tonight. This deal with Pinnacle is too important. Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, Mother. I smiled sweetly. I'm just here to make my announcement, remember? Her eyes narrowed. What announcement? You'll see. Back in the dining room, Natasha was mid-pitch. The development will completely transform the neighborhood. Property values will soar. Sounds wonderful, my mother beamed. Edmund, doesn't it sound wonderful? My father nodded absently, pushing food around his plate. He hadn't looked at anyone since the cafe incident. Actually, Elijah stood, raising his glass. Before we discuss business, Julia and I have an announcement. Here we go, Leah whispered, squeezing my hand under the table. We're getting married. Julia flashed her enormous diamond ring. And we're building our dream home right here in the neighborhood as part of the Pinnacle development. My mother burst into tears of joy. Natasha smiled like a cat who got the cream. My father just stared at his plate. Congratulations, I said, standing. What perfect timing. I have an announcement too. Chloe, my father's voice held a warning. It's about the development project, actually. I pulled out a folder, specifically about the land the house sits on. Natasha's smile faltered slightly. My mother stopped crying. What about it? Elijah asked. Well, funny story. I started passing out copies of the property documents. It turns out the land under this house has been separate from the property deed since 1960, and 3 weeks ago it was purchased at public auction. The room went dead silent. By whom? My mother's voice was dangerous. By me. I met her eyes across the table. Through my company. So technically, you can sell the house to Pinnacle, but the land, that belongs to me. Chaos erupted. My mother knocked over her wine glass. Elijah started shouting about family loyalty. Julia clutched her ring in horror. You can't do this, my mother shrieked. Actually, she can, Natasha interjected smoothly, and she has every right to. All eyes turned to her. You knew, Elijah accused. Of course I knew. Why do you think I invited Chloe to partner with Pinnacle? Natasha smiled. She owns the most crucial piece of the development puzzle. Partner? My mother's face was scarlet. There will be no partnership. This is our family home. The home you were ready to sell to strangers? I shot back. The home that was going to be part of Elijah's perfect life, just like everything else? That's not fair, Elijah started. Fair? I laughed. Like writing me out of the will was fair? Like dismissing every achievement I've ever had was fair. I kept them, my father said quietly. Everyone turned to him. What? My mother asked. Her achievements, every newspaper clipping, every award, I kept them all. He finally looked up. While you were busy planning Elijah's life, our daughter built an empire of her own, and I never gave her the recognition she deserved. Edmund, my mother gasped. No, Viviana, enough. He stood up. Chloe, whatever you plan to do with the land, it's your right. You've earned it. Natasha cleared her throat. Perhaps this is a good time to discuss Chloe's alternative development proposal? I pulled out another set of documents. The house stays, but we build around it, creating a mixed-use space that preserves the neighborhood's history while moving it into the future. The family keeps their home. Under my terms. Your terms? My mother spat. Yes, starting with a new will, splitting everything equally. An acknowledgement, real acknowledgement, of my place in this family. The room fell silent again. Leah squeezed my hand harder. Finally, Elijah spoke. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't tear down our home. I looked at my mother, who sat rigid with fury, then at my father, who gave me the smallest nod of approval. Well then, I said, raising my glass. Shall we discuss terms? Sign it, Mother. I pushed the new will across the lawyer's conference table. A week had passed since the dinner revelation, and we were finally here, the moment of truth. This is blackmail, she said, fingers trembling as she held the pen. No, this is consequences. I remained standing, Leah and my father flanking me. You can't sell the house without my cooperation, and you won't get that until things change. Elijah, sitting beside our mother, reached for her hand. Mom, just sign it. Chloe's right. This has gone on long enough. Et tu, Elijah? She turned to him, tears welling. After everything I've done for you? That's exactly the problem, he said quietly. Everything you've done for me, and nothing for Chloe. I never saw it before, but I see it now. Tessa, our family lawyer, cleared her throat. Mrs. Mackenzie, the terms are quite reasonable. Equal inheritance, joint decision-making power over family assets, and a seat on the board of the new development project. And the house? My mother's voice was barely a whisper. Remains in the family trust, I said, with all of us as equal trustees. No more playing favorites, no more secret decisions. My father stepped forward. Viviana, please, our daughter has built something remarkable. It's time we acknowledge that. By holding our home hostage? By demanding respect, I corrected, something you never gave freely. The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. Finally, my mother picked up the pen. "You'll regret this," she said, signing with a flourish, "turning family against family." "No, Mother, you did that all on your own." As soon as she signed, Natasha entered with the development contracts. "Perfect timing. Shall we discuss the future of the neighborhood?" The next hour was a blur of signatures and legal terms. My mother refused to look at anyone, signing where indicated with rigid movements. Elijah surprisingly supported every proposal, even suggesting ways to incorporate my company's branding into the development. "There's one more thing," I said as the last document was signed, "the family photo wall in the house." "What about it?" My mother snapped. "It's coming down. All of it. We're replacing it with a new one, featuring everyone's achievements, equally." "I have those clippings," my father said quickly, "and photos from your company launches, your awards ceremonies." "I have some too," Elijah added, "from that time you spoke at Harvard Business School. I kept the program." I turned to him surprised. "You came to that?" "Of course I did. You're my sister." He looked down. I should have said something then about how impressive it was. "But Mom?" "But I wouldn't have approved," our mother finished bitterly. "Is that what you're saying?" "Yes," he said firmly. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Natasha gathered the contracts. "Well, I'd say this has been a productive morning. Chloe, shall we meet tomorrow to discuss the groundbreaking ceremony?" After she left, my mother stood abruptly. "I suppose you're all very pleased with yourselves." "Mom," I said, softer now, "this isn't about pleasing anyone. It's about fixing what's broken." "Nothing was broken until you—" "Everything was broken," my voice cracked. "Every time you dismissed my achievements, every time you praised Elijah while ignoring me, every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough, it broke something, and now I'm finally strong enough to fix it." Leah touched my shoulder supportively. My father moved to stand beside me. "The question is," I continued, "are you strong enough to admit you were wrong?" My mother looked around the room, at Elijah's determined face, at my father's quiet support, at the signed documents that changed everything. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or regret. "I need time," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," I replied. "The house isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." She left without another word, my father following after giving me a quick hug. Elijah lingered. "That photo from my Harvard speech," I said. "You really kept it?" "I keep a lot of things." He pulled out his phone, showing me a folder of saved articles about my company. "I was proud of you, Chloe. I just didn't know how to say it without making Mom angry." "And now?" "Now?" He smiled slightly. "Now I'm saying it. You're incredible, sis, and I'm sorry it took this to make me admit it." After everyone left, Leah hugged me tightly. "You did it. You actually did it." "Yeah," I said, looking at the signed documents. "But why doesn't it feel like victory?" "Because it's not over," she replied wisely. "This isn't about winning or losing anymore. It's about healing." I nodded, thinking of my mother's face as she signed the will. "The hard part's just beginning, isn't it?" "Probably," Leah agreed. "But this time, you're not facing it alone." The construction crews had finally left for the day, leaving the neighborhood peacefully quiet as I stood in the family home's living room, supervising the hanging of the new photo wall. The old Elijah-centric display had been carefully packed away, replaced by a balanced chronicle of our family's true history. My phone buzzed. A text from Natasha. Press is confirmed for tomorrow's opening. Your mother? Still deciding, I replied, though I knew she wouldn't come. The symmetry is perfect, Leah said, stepping back to admire our work. Look at how your Forbes cover balances with Elijah's Business Weekly feature. And your father's engineering awards, Valeria added, adjusting a frame. Who knew he had so many patents? The front door opened and my father walked in, carrying a small box. I found more photos in the attic. Dad, we're running out of wall space, I laughed, but stopped when I saw his expression. He pulled out a dusty frame. Your mother took this, the day you won your first debate championship. The photo showed teenage me, beaming with a trophy, while my mother stood beside me, actually smiling. I'd forgotten that smile existed. I remember that day, I said softly. She took me for ice cream afterward. Before Elijah got into Harvard, my father finished. Before everything changed. Put it up, Leah suggested, right in the center. As we worked, the door opened again. This time it was Elijah, looking tired but determined. Julia left, he announced without preamble. What? I turned from the wall. Why? She wanted the fairy tale, the perfect family, the society wedding, the dream house in the development. He shrugged. I told her I was done pretending. Are you okay? I asked. Actually, yeah. He studied the photo wall. Hey, is that from the debate championship? Mom looks happy. She was, my father said. We all were. Before we lost our way, a voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see our mother standing there, clutching her handbag like a shield. The development opening is tomorrow, she said stiffly. I assume you're expecting me to attend? Only if you want to, I replied carefully. She stepped into the room, eyes fixed on the photo wall. You kept the old photos. The real ones, I said. The ones that tell our whole story, not just the version you wanted to see. She reached out, touching the debate championship photo. You were so proud that day, and I was proud too, until you decided Elijah's achievements were the only ones that mattered. Until I convinced myself that was true, she corrected quietly. I was wrong, Chloe. The room went still. In 32 years, I'd never heard those words from her. I was so focused on building the perfect family image that I destroyed the real one. She turned to face me. The development plans you made, keeping the house, building around it, preserving what matters while creating something new. That's what I should have done with our family. Mom, Elijah started. Let me finish. She straightened her shoulders. I can't undo the past, but I can do better now, starting with tomorrow's opening. What about it? I asked. I'd like to speak, to publicly acknowledge both my children's achievements, if you'll let me. I looked at Leah, who nodded encouragingly, then at my father, who was smiling through tears. Okay, I said, but no more pretending, no more perfect family facade. No, she agreed, just us, as we are. She stepped closer to the wall, examining each photo carefully. We should add the newspaper clipping from your first real estate deal and Elijah's Community Service Award, the one he got for teaching business skills to at-risk youth. You knew about that? Elijah asked, surprised. I know more than I've shown, she admitted. I was just too proud to acknowledge anything that didn't fit my plan. As we worked together, adding new photos and rearranging others, I felt something shift in the room, like a weight lifting or a window opening after a long winter. There, my mother said finally, stepping back. Now it tells the truth. I looked at our family's story spread across the wall. The triumphs and failures, the perfect moments and the messy ones. All of it real, all of it ours. The truth looks good on us, I said. My mother reached for my hand, then Elijah's. Yes, she agreed softly. It does. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, illuminating our new family photo wall. Not perfect, not flawless, but finally, beautifully honest.
You could say I traded in chaos for candy when I met Ben. My days used to be filled with managing disasters and cleaning up corporate messes, but then love swept in, and before I knew it, I was knee-deep in sugar and spice and everything nice at Sugar Haven, Ben's family candy store. It wasn't long before I took over the store's finances, and we started to see some real success. "Good morning, love." Ben greeted me one Monday as I stepped into the sweet aroma of our shop. His smile was infectious, and despite the tension that was brewing, it was a reminder of why I was here. "Morning," I replied, flipping through the mail, bills mostly, which I had learned to manage like a pro. "Sales are up this month. That new chocolate line is a hit," I said, trying to keep things positive. Ben just shrugged, a bit too casually. "Yeah, well, that's all you, isn't it? Mom still thinks I'm the candy king." He chuckled, but I could tell the words weighed on him more than he let on. Speaking of the devil, Linda waltzed in, all smiles and no sense of personal space. "Benjamin, my boy, you've outdone yourself. The store looks fabulous," she beamed, patting her son on the back. Her gaze then slid over to me, and her lips pursed just slightly. "Anna, still playing shopkeeper, I see." I let out a soft sigh. "Good morning, Linda, and yes, playing shopkeeper is keeping us in the black," I responded, keeping my tone even. It was too early for a spat, and the last thing I wanted was to give her the satisfaction of seeing me ruffled. She tisked, waving a hand in dismissal. "Numbers, numbers. You should leave that to the accountants and help my son with the real business." Her eyes glinted with that all-too-familiar mix of disdain and condescension. Before I could answer, Ben stepped in. "Mom, Anna's doing more than fine. We're doing great because she's got a head for business." He slipped an arm around my waist, a silent show of solidarity. Linda sniffed, clearly not convinced. "Well, as long as my boy is happy, I suppose that's what matters." And with that, she flounced off to the other side of the store, presumably to find some other way to remind us of her presence. Ben squeezed my side apologetically. "Don't let her get to you," he murmured. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm not. Let's just focus on the shop, okay?" And focus we did. With each day, Sugar Haven became more than just a candy store. It was our little piece of paradise. At least that's what I thought until everything began to crumble. I started noticing the changes when the deliveries got more frequent, and they weren't full of sugar or spice, but things that had price tags that made my stomach drop. "Another package, Ben?" I asked one evening as I locked up the register. I held up a sleek gadget still in its shiny packaging. It looked expensive. "Oh, that's the new phone I ordered," Ben said with a grin as he cut open the box like a kid on Christmas. "Top of the line." I raised an eyebrow. "Don't we have other things to invest in? The mixer in the back has been making that funny noise." Ben dismissed me with a wave of his hand, his attention fixed on peeling the protective film off his new toy. "It's fine, Anna. We've got to treat ourselves too, you know?" A part of me wanted to argue, to remind him of the thin line we were walking financially, but I bit my tongue. It wasn't just the phone either. Linda had taken to showing off new outfits every other week, parading through Sugar Haven like it was her personal runway. "Anna, look at this dress, isn't it just darling?" Linda twirled in a floral number that had to cost more than we made in a day. "It's nice," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But aren't we supposed to be saving up to fix the sign out front?" Linda scoffed, patting her son's cheek. "Nonsense! The store is doing wonderfully. Benjamin, tell her." Ben, who had been half listening, nodded along. "Yeah, we're doing great, Anna. Don't worry so much." That was the problem, though. I did worry. I worried every time I looked at our books and saw the numbers that didn't add up. Doing great wasn't the term I would use when every profit we made was being swallowed by personal purchases. Look, I'm just saying we should be careful. I tried again later that week as we sat down to look at our finances. Maybe we can set a budget for personal expenses? Ben looked at me like I'd suggested we sell the store and become circus performers. A budget? Come on, Anna, we're not that bad, and it's not like you to be stingy. It stung, that word, stingy. I wasn't being stingy. I was being sensible. It's not about being stingy, Ben. It's about being smart. We have to think about the future of Sugar Haven. He didn't seem to hear me, though, already scrolling through a website for another purchase. You worry too much, he said, half distracted. It'll all work out. Things took a turn when Linda decided to bring in some extra help. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were inventory days, and I was elbow deep in organizing our latest shipment of candy jars when she walked in, arm in arm with a girl who couldn't have been older than 20. Anna, this is Tessa, Linda announced with a flourish. Tessa, dear, this is Anna, my son's assistant. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. Nice to meet you, Tessa, but I'm actually the co-manager here. Tessa offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've heard a lot about you. I'm really excited to be part of the team. I glanced at Linda, whose smug look was enough to tell me she hadn't consulted Ben about this new development. What exactly will Tessa be assisting with? I asked, trying to keep my tone friendly. Oh, she's going to be helping out with the business side of things. You can only do so much, after all, Linda said, with a dismissive glance at my inventory list. I nodded, still a bit confused. All right, well, we have a system here, so I'll have to bring her up to speed. It didn't take long for me to see that Tessa's version of helping out was more about hovering and less about doing actual work. And when I saw the salary Ben's mother had set for her, I nearly choked. Ben, can we talk? I cornered him later that day in the office. Sure, what's up? He asked, not looking up from his computer. It's about Tessa. Her salary it's more than what we can afford for the role she's in. Ben finally looked up, his brow furrowing. Mom said it was fine. She thinks Tessa's going to bring a lot to the table. I sighed, feeling like I was talking to a wall. But we agreed to discuss new hires together, especially when it comes to how much we're paying them. He shrugged, that annoyingly dismissive gesture becoming more frequent. What's done is done. Mom has a good feeling about her. I had to bite back a retort. Good feelings didn't balance books. I left the office feeling like I was the only one seeing the red flags, while Ben and his mother were content to parade around with blindfolds. I've always been the kind to check twice, maybe 3 times, especially when it comes to numbers. So when I stumbled upon an envelope stuffed in the back of a filing cabinet while hunting for a misplaced invoice, my first thought was that it was just another forgotten bill. But as I flipped through the papers, my heart started to race, not from excitement, but from cold, hard dread. It was a loan document, with Sugar Haven listed as collateral, and the amount was far more than what would ever be considered reasonable for our modest shop. Ben, I said, walking into his cluttered office, papers in hand. What is this? He glanced up, and I saw his eyes flicker, the first sign of guilt I'd seen in him in months. Oh, it's nothing. Just a small loan I took out to cover, store improvements. Store improvements? I echoed, incredulous. This amount could renovate the store 5 times over. What did you really use it for? There was a pause, long enough for the truth to wedge itself between us. Okay, look, he started, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. I might have used some of it for the house, the one I've been working on, for us. For us? I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. Or for your gadgets and whatever else you've been blowing money on. He stood up then, his chair scraping back with a sound that felt like a gavel on my patience. It's not like that, Anna. You don't understand. This is all going to pay off in the end. I shook my head. No, Ben. Taking out a loan against the store without telling me, that's what I don't understand. How could you be so reckless? Before he could answer, Linda bustled in, her nose wrinkling as she saw the papers in my hand. What's all this about? she demanded. Ben tried to explain, but I cut him off, thrusting the loan papers at her. Did you know about this? She barely glanced at the documents before waving them off. Of course I did. Ben's just doing what's necessary for our future. And who are you to question him? You're just the help, after all. The words stung, but more than that, they fueled a fire in me. Just the help? I said, my voice low but firm. I've been keeping this store afloat while you two have been treating it like your personal bank account. Ben's face had gone pale, and Linda looked like she was about to spit fire. You ungrateful little— No, I interrupted, my calm surprising even myself. What's ungrateful is not recognizing the hard work someone's been putting into this business. What's foolish is risking everything for a house that we don't even need. I waited for them to say something, to defend themselves, but all they did was stare at me, caught in the act. I left the room then, the documents clutched in my hand like a verdict yet to be delivered. The kitchen table was never really meant for business meetings, but that day, it was surrounded by the most solemn faces, as if we were about to discuss matters of state instead of the confectionery. Ben cleared his throat, his eyes not quite meeting mine. We need to talk about the store's future. I sat down, folding my hands on the table. We already did that when I found the loan documents. Linda huffed from across the table, her arms crossed. We need to be realistic, Anna. The store isn't pulling in enough to cover the debts. We have to find money somewhere. There it was, the we that really meant me. I kept my voice steady. What do you suggest? Her eyes gleamed with a kind of cold calculation. You have that inheritance from your parents. It could cover the debts and get the store back on its feet. I felt like I was listening to a stranger, not the woman whose son I had married. You want me to use my parents' money? The money they left for me, for my future? Ben finally spoke up. It's not like you're doing anything else with it. That money was meant for me, for my security, I said, the disbelief clear in my voice. And what about our security? Linda shot back. You're part of this family now, aren't you? I looked between them, my heart sinking. I am, but it seems you only remember that when you need something from me. Ben shifted uncomfortably. It's not like that, but we're drowning here, Anna. So, you expect me to just hand over my future? Just like that? I asked. Linda leaned forward. If you care about this family, yes. I thought of the long hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices I had made for the store. If I do this, if I invest my inheritance, I want 1/3 of the store. I want to be an official co-owner. The room fell silent. Then Linda laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the walls. You? A co-owner? Don't be ridiculous. You're not business material. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Then you find another way to cover your debts, because my inheritance is not your emergency fund. Ben's face was unreadable, but Linda's was red with anger. You'd let this family business go under? I've tried to save it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm. I wasn't one for late-night visits to the shop, but something in my gut told me to go to Sugar Haven that evening. The place was dark, which was expected, but the faint glow of a light from the back office wasn't. I pushed the door open, the familiar tinkle of the bell sounding almost ominous in the silence. The sweet scent of confectionery that usually comforted me now felt heavy, loaded with the scent of betrayal as I walked towards the back. The murmurs from the office grew clearer as I approached, and then I saw them through the partly open door. Ben, with his arms around the new assistant, Tessa, who giggled at something he whispered in her ear. I pushed the door open fully, and they sprang apart, their expressions turning from shock to guilt within seconds. Anna, Ben stammered, straightening his shirt. What are you— It's not what it looks like. I crossed my arms, feeling a cold calm settle over me. Really? Because it looks like I just caught my husband with his arms around another woman. Tessa was smoothing her hair back, looking anywhere but at me. We were just going over inventory. At midnight? With the inventory in your arms? I said, my tone dry. Ben's eyes were pleading now. Anna, please, you're blowing this out of proportion. I laughed, short and humorless. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear to me. He took a step towards me, and I held up a hand. Save it, Ben. I don't know what's worse, the cheating or the pathetic lies. Tessa finally spoke up, her voice small. I'm sorry, Anna. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I looked at her, really looked at her, young, naive, and caught in the web of a man who couldn't take responsibility for his actions. You should be, and you should also be looking for another job. Ben's protest was immediate. You can't fire her for this. I turned to him, my resolve steeling. I can and I will, and I'll be looking for a good lawyer in the morning. His face paled. Anna, please, let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I said, cutting him off. You've made your choices. Now you get to live with them. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of there with my head held high, the sound of Ben calling after me fading into the background. The morning after, I caught Ben was bright, a stark contrast to the mood in our home. I'd spent the night at my own place, the one I kept as a rental property. As I sat at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a message from Ben. I considered not even reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a photo of a bank letter addressed to Ben, the words, "Final notice," and "immediate repayment required" standing out. Beneath it, he'd typed a message. We need to talk. This is serious. I typed back a simple, on my way, and got ready to face the music. When I arrived at the confectionery, Ben and Linda were already there, pacing like caged animals. Linda spotted me first, and her expression soured. Decided to show up, did you? She snapped as I walked in. I nodded, holding her gaze. You wanted to talk? Ben held out the letter to me. The bank's coming down hard. We could lose everything. I scanned the letter, the numbers not surprising me, but still making my stomach turn. So, what's your plan? Linda's plan was apparently to glare daggers at me. We wouldn't be in this mess if you just helped us when we asked. Ignoring her, I addressed Ben. What are you going to do? He ran a hand through his hair, looking defeated. I thought you could pay it off, with your inheritance. My laugh was bitter. And I told you, I'm not doing that without a stake in the business. Linda stepped forward. You're being unreasonable, Anna. This is a family business. I met her challenge with a calm I didn't feel. And where was this family when your son was spending money we don't have and hiring his friends for fun? Ben started to say something, but stopped, his eyes dropping to the floor. You don't get to play the family card only when it suits you, I continued. We'll figure something else out then, Ben muttered. You'll have to, I agreed. Then Linda did something unexpected. She smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. Fine, but if you're not going to help, then you're out. We'll manage without you. You're fired. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch out before I matched her smile with my own. Okay. Their surprise was almost comical. Just like that? Ben asked, his voice incredulous. Just like that, I confirmed. But I want you to know, I took photos of you and Tessa. I have records of all the money you've wasted. If you think you can fire me and sweep all this under the rug, you're wrong. Linda's smile vanished. You wouldn't dare. Oh, but I would. And when I leave, I'm taking all my hard work with me. You can explain to the bank why the business is about to tank without the person who is actually running it. Months had passed since I last set foot in Sugar Haven, and life had taken on a new kind of normal. The crisp sound of papers, the hum of focused conversations, and the sight of a crisis managed and resolved. These had replaced the scent of sugar and spice. I sat in my new office, a stark contrast to the confectionary's back room, when my phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Claire, a former employee at the shop and the only one I still talked to. Hey Claire, what's up? I greeted, with a hint of caution. News about Sugar Haven always carried a tinge of the past. You haven't heard then? Claire's voice was a mix of pity and discomfort. The shop. They closed down last week. The bank foreclosed on them, and the house too. I leaned back in my chair, a weight lifting off my shoulders that I hadn't realized was there. I see. And Ben and his mother? There was a pause. They're not doing great. Rumor has it they've moved in with his aunt. No one's seen them much. I sighed, not quite sure how to feel. Thanks for letting me know, Claire. She hesitated before adding, Anna, everyone knows you were the heart of that place. It was never the same after you left. A small, sad smile touched my lips. I appreciate you saying that. How about you? Found a new job yet? Yeah, I'm working at a bakery downtown. It's not Sugar Haven, but it's a start. That's great to hear. You always had a talent for baking. I'm sure you'll do well there. We chatted for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. I hung up and looked out the window at the bustling street below. There was a knock at my door, and my assistant peeked in. Your 3 o'clock is here, Anna. Thanks, send them in, I responded, shaking off the remnants of nostalgia. The clients came in, a husband and wife team looking worried about their own business. I stood to greet them, ready to dive into another challenge. We've heard great things about you, Anna, the wife said as we sat down. They say you're the best crisis manager in town. I smiled, the title sitting comfortably with me. I'll do my best to live up to that reputation. Now, tell me about your business, and let's see how we can turn things around. As they spoke, I listened, already forming strategies in my mind. This was my world now, where every problem had a solution and every crisis was an opportunity. Sugar Haven and its bitter memories were behind me, and ahead was a path that I had forged for myself, a path of resilience, redemption, and rebirth. The meeting stretched on, the client's initial anxiety giving way to hopeful smiles as we discussed possibilities. They left with a renewed sense of purpose, and I turned back to my desk, my heart lighter than it had been in a long time. In the end, I realized that sometimes the sweetest outcomes come after the most bitter trials, and the future was mine to create, one careful step at a time. Life's funny, isn't it? One minute you're on top of the world, the next, it's crumbling beneath your feet. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This story begins in the warm glow of happiness. My name's Emily, and not too long ago, my biggest problem was deciding what to cook for dinner or what movie to watch on a lazy Sunday afternoon. James and I met in what you might call the old-fashioned way, at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was the guy flipping burgers and telling stories, making everyone laugh. I remember thinking, who is this guy? With his easy smile and a way of looking at me like I was the only one there. It didn't take long for us to become an us. Emily, you have to try my special burger, he'd said, handing me a plate with a confidence that made me smile. It's got a secret sauce that'll change your life. I laughed, rolling my eyes. Change my life, huh? That's a pretty big claim for a burger. But I'll admit, it was a darn good burger. Maybe not life-changing, but it definitely made that day memorable. Not long after, James met Grandma. She was everything to me, the one who raised me when my own parents couldn't. The way he talked to her, with respect and a bit of playful banter, it won her over in a heartbeat. I like him, she whispered to me as he went to grab us some lemonade. He's genuine, and he's got kind eyes. You hold on to this one, Emily. And hold on, I did. We got married in a small ceremony, just family and close friends. The house I moved into was full of memories. The walls echoed with laughter from a time when my parents were still alive. James and I started filling it with new memories of our own, and it felt like life was just right. I got pregnant about a year into the marriage. When I told James, the look on his face was something I thought I'd remember forever with warmth in my heart. His joy seemed to match mine, filling up the room until it was almost bursting. We're going to have a baby, Em, he said, lifting me up and spinning me around. A little one of our own, can you believe it? I can, I whispered back, because it's happening with you. They say bad news never has good timing. The day I lost Grandma was a cold slap of reality, a reminder that life doesn't play fair. Grandma was more than family. She was my confidant, my cheerleader, my safe place. Losing her felt like being adrift at sea without a compass. I remember sitting on the sofa, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, numb. James came to me, his face a mask of concern. Em, talk to me, he urged, his voice gentle. "What's there to talk about?" I muttered, staring at the tea, watching as it lost its steam, its warmth, its life, kind of like how I felt inside. "We'll get through this together. You're not alone," he said, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. But his words, meant to comfort, felt distant, like a radio playing softly in the background, familiar yet easy to tune out. Then, as if I hadn't already been robbed of enough, our baby slipped away before I ever got to hold them, to tell them how much I loved them, to promise them the world. The miscarriage was like a physical blow, one that knocked the wind out of me and left me gasping for air, for answers, for comfort that wouldn't come. James was there, yes, always there, but somehow not really. "Emily, we can try for another baby when you're ready," he said one night as we lay in the darkness, his voice void of the pain I felt. I turned to him, a part of me desperate to find the husband who had once spun me around in joy. "I don't want another baby, James. I wanted this one. Our baby." The words were a whisper, but they might as well have been screams for how they echoed in the silence. "We'll make it through this," he said. But his assurance sounded hollow, like a promise made out of obligation rather than desire. I sought refuge in solitude, in the quiet of the house filled with too many ghosts of what could have been. Days melded into nights, and I lost track of time. I lost track of myself. James tried, in his way. "Let's go out, see people. It might help," he suggested one day, his hand resting lightly on the back of the chair I was slumped in. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on a crack in the wall, a blemish I hadn't noticed before. "I can't face the world, James. Not yet. The world is where the pain is." "Emily, staying cooped up in here won't change what happened," he pressed, but I barely heard him. How could I tell him that the world outside these walls reminded me of everything I had lost? That every street corner, every shop window, every smiling face was a reminder of a happiness that felt like it had been stolen from me? The funeral was a blur. People came, they said things, they left. I nodded, I shook hands, I accepted condolences. But nothing got through. I was in a bubble, watching life happen around me, a life I no longer felt a part of. James was there, of course, but his presence felt more like a shadow than a source of warmth. "You're so strong, Emily," he told me after the service, his hand finding mine. I wanted to pull away, to scream that I wasn't strong, that I was broken. Instead, I just nodded. What was the point in correcting him? The truth seemed too heavy to share, even with him. As days turned into weeks, I felt James pulling away. Maybe he was tired of dealing with someone who seemed to have given up on life. Maybe he just didn't know how to help me. Maybe he needed an escape from the suffocating sadness that had enveloped our home. "I'm here for you, Em, but you need to start being here too," he said one evening, his patience wearing thin. "Here?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know where here is anymore, James." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I mean, you need to start living again, for your sake and mine." I looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw the strain in his eyes. I knew he was struggling too, in his own way, but the gulf between us had grown too wide, too deep to cross with mere words. That's when the creeping thought began to take root. Maybe I was alone in this after all. James was there, but not really. Not in the way I needed him to be. As the days rolled into weeks and then months, the chasm between James and me grew wider. The man who had once seemed like my anchor was becoming more and more like a stranger, coming home late and sometimes not at all. It gnawed at me, this feeling of him slipping away. I remember one evening, the clock ticking past midnight and the other side of the bed still cold and untouched. When he finally came through the door, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Where have you been, James? Do you know what time it is?" My voice was shaky but firm. He looked tired, his eyes avoiding mine. "Work's been a nightmare. You know how it is." His voice was flat, dismissive almost. "No, I don't know," I snapped back, "because you never talk to me about it anymore. You never talk to me about anything." He let out a long sigh and began to take off his jacket. "Em, we've been through this. Work is work. It's stressful, and I don't want to burden you with it. But I want to share that burden, James. I thought that's what we did, I said, the last of my words trailing off into a whisper. He paused and finally sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at me. I know, and I appreciate it, but you have enough on your plate. Enough on my plate? I repeated, incredulous. You mean dealing with the loss and trying to piece myself back together? Do you think ignoring me helps with that? That's not what I'm doing, he protested. But even as he said it, it sounded like he didn't believe it himself. I offered you a divorce, James, I reminded him, my voice breaking a little. I told you that you didn't have to stay with me out of pity or obligation. He looked up sharply at that. Is that what you think this is? Pity? Obligation? There was a hint of the old fire in his voice, a glimmer of the man I knew. Yes, that's what it feels like, I admitted. You're here, but you're not with me, not really, and it hurts. He ran his hands through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I'm trying. I really am, but I can't just switch off from work. It's been really tough. But it's more than work, isn't it? You're away even when you're here. You've got your phone on you all the time, always texting, always distracted. He didn't say anything to that, just stared at the floor. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air, heavy and frightening. Don't be ridiculous, he said quickly, but his eyes told a different story. I felt a coldness spread through me. This was not the man I married, the one who would look me in the eyes and tell me the truth, no matter how hard. I need you to be honest with me, James. Please, I implored, my hands clasping and unclasping in my lap. He was silent for a long moment, and then, there's no one else. It's just work. You've got to believe me. I wanted to. Oh, how I wanted to believe him. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and once that happens, things can never go back to how they were. In the weeks that followed, I watched James like a detective. I noticed how his phone was always face down, how he'd step out of the room to take calls. The signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. It was a Wednesday when my world finally started to crumble. I answered a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Emily Stanton? The voice was male, gruff, and not one I knew. Yes, who's this? The man paused and then, we need to talk about your husband. My heart sank. What about him? I think you'd better sit down, Mrs. Stanton. The cafe was one of those nondescript places, sandwiched between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore. It seemed like a fitting backdrop for what was to come. I sat there, stirring my coffee, each second stretching out like an eternity until the man showed up. He was a large man, with a look that didn't invite many questions. He sat across from me, his hands clasped together, a folder sitting like a barrier between us. Mrs. Stanton, I'm sorry for the mystery, but I thought it was best we talk in person, he started, his voice serious. Who are you? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. He nodded as if he expected the question. My name's Mike Sanders, and I believe we have a common problem. Your husband, James. I swallowed hard. What about him? Mike opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It was James with a woman I'd never seen before. They were laughing, close, too close. That's my wife, Mike said, tapping the picture. I felt a strange detachment looking at it. What do they have to do with each other? They work together, and they're having an affair, he said bluntly. I looked up, meeting his gaze. That's impossible. James would never... He reached back into the folder and took out a handful of printed messages, placing them in front of me. These are just from the past week. I read them, each word a tiny dagger. There were plans to meet up, pet names, and talk of the future. A future without me, without us. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice a ghost of itself. Because I thought you should know, and because I want to end it. I thought maybe you would want that too. I stared at the evidence, my mind racing, but my heart already knew the truth. He told me he loved me. He promised he'd never leave. People lie, Mrs. Stanton, and they're good at it, Mike said, his voice bitter. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. He was all I had, Mike leaned forward. You got a choice here. You can pretend this never happened, go on with your life. Or you can confront him, make him face what he's done. And what about you? I asked. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. I'm going to divorce her. She can have him if she wants. I just want out. My hands were shaking as I gathered the papers, folding them with care I didn't feel. What are you going to do? Mike asked. The answer surprised even me. I'm going to fight back. Mike nodded. Good. If you need anything, evidence, support, you let me know. Thank you, I said. But as I stood up, I felt anything but thankful. My life as I knew it was over, and it was time for me to figure out what came next. That day, the sun hung low, a glaring eye that seemed to watch over the unfolding scene with indifference. I was waiting on the porch when James's car pulled up. His step was light, too light for a man coming home to a crumbling marriage. He caught the look on my face as he approached. What's with the gloom? He asked casually, as if my scowl was just another part of an ordinary day. I held up one of the photos silently. His eyes flicked to it, and his smile faltered, but only for a second. Oh, that, he chuckled. I see you've met my other woman. I felt a hollow laugh bubble up from my throat. Is that all you can say? Oh, that? He folded his arms and leaned against the porch railing. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That it was a mistake? Because it wasn't. I'm not sorry, and it was no mistake. Why, James? I demanded, my hands clenching the photo so tightly the edges crumpled. He laughed, a cold, heartless sound. You were convenient, you know? A nice house, a decent bit of savings, and when your grandmother passed, well, that was just icing on the cake. I recoiled as if he'd struck me. You think my grandmother's death was a financial gain? Why else would I stick around? He shrugged. Especially after, you know. He paused, eyeing me with a cruelty I hadn't seen before. After the kid. I shook my head in disbelief. And you hoped what? That I'd off myself in grief? Would have made things simpler, he quipped. His words were like acid, burning through the last vestiges of the life I thought I knew. You're vile, I hissed. You always were too sensitive, too stupid to see what was right in front of you. He continued mercilessly. You thought I would end my life? I asked, the reality of his betrayal sinking in, a cold weight in my stomach. It would have been a win-win. You'd escape your pathetic little life, and I'd be free with a nice little nest egg. His grin was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. I couldn't hold back the tears, but I was damned if I'd let him see them fall. And now? What's your grand plan now? Now? He laughed again, stepping closer. Now, I guess I'll have to settle for a divorce. You'll probably screw me over on that, won't you? Drag it out. Make me suffer. You don't deserve quick and easy, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly even. His expression soured. You're an ugly, stupid woman, you know that? I don't know what I was thinking, marrying you. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I felt something shift inside me. The man I had loved was a ghost, a fiction. In his place stood a stranger with a heart full of venom. Get off my porch, James, I said quietly. He smirked, taking a step back. Gladly. This place was never really my style anyway. The courthouse was a place where I thought I'd celebrate our milestones. Instead, I walked up its steps to dissolve the very foundation of my marriage. Mike was right beside me, his presence a silent support. I had the papers in my hand, feeling the weight of every word that testified against James. Mike carried his own set of damning evidence, a mirror to my betrayal. Our steps echoed in the empty hallway, a march towards a verdict we both needed. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale, heavy with the burden of judgments past. James and his mistress, Mike's wife, were already there, a tableau of guilt. Mrs. Stanton? The clerk called out. I stepped forward, handing over the sheaf of papers that detailed every misstep of my husband's affair. The judge surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on me, then on Mike. You have evidence to present? I nodded, my throat tight. Yes, Your Honor. The evidence was laid bare for the court to see. Photographs that spoke 1,000 words of betrayal, texts, and call logs that wove a narrative of deceit. I didn't look at James. I didn't need to see his face to remember his lies. "And how do you plead?" the judge asked, turning to James and his co-defendant. Their answers were a soft murmur of legalese. "No contest." The judge took his time, reviewing the evidence, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice the gavel that shattered the last tie between James and me. "In light of the uncontested evidence, I am granting the petition for divorce. The division of assets will proceed as outlined, and given the circumstances, Mr. Stanton, you will also pay restitution." James stood, his face ashen, but I felt nothing. No victory, no joy, just the hollow end of a chapter. Mike met my gaze, a silent question in his eyes. Had it been worth it? I could only nod. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about setting the record straight, about reclaiming my dignity from the ruins James had left behind. The courtroom's heavy door swung closed behind me with a sound that felt final. Mike and I found a quiet corner in the bustling hallway outside. "So, it's done," Mike said, his voice a mix of relief and something else, maybe sadness. I nodded, the reality of the situation settling in. "It's done. They didn't even put up a fight, did they?" "No," he sighed, looking down at the floor. "They knew there was no point." I thought about James, about the love I thought we shared, and how it had all been a lie. "Do you think they're sorry for what they did, or just sorry they got caught?" Mike's gaze met mine, steady and sure. "Does it matter? They're out of our lives now. That's what counts." I let out a long breath, one I'd been holding since the day I got that call. "I guess you're right. I didn't want it to end this way." "Nobody ever does," he said. "But you stood up for yourself. That counts for a lot." The weight of the papers in my bag seemed lighter now. Justice, or something like it, had been served. It didn't undo the past, but it cleared the path for the future. "I just want to move on," I admitted. "And you will," Mike assured me. "This is a fresh start for both of us." I managed a small smile. "A fresh start," I echoed. We walked to the exit, the light from the doors growing brighter as we approached. Outside, the sun was shining, and the world moved on, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding in its midst. "Emily," Mike said as we stepped into the daylight, "what will you do first?" I thought for a moment. "I'm going to go home, take a long bath, and then I'm going to start planning my future, one step at a time." "That sounds perfect," he said. "And if you ever need a friend, you know where to find me." I looked at him, grateful for his unexpected friendship. "Thank you, Mike, for everything." The days following the divorce were quiet. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some of Grandma's old things, the doorbell rang. I hesitated for a moment, half expecting the past to be on my doorstep, but it was just Sarah, my neighbor. "Hey, Emily," she greeted me with a warm, if somewhat pitying smile. "I heard about everything. I'm so sorry. I brought you some casserole. I figured you might not feel like cooking." I managed a small laugh. "You figured right. Thanks, Sarah." We settled in the kitchen, the casserole warming in the oven, filling the room with a homely scent. "So, what will you do now?" Sarah asked, sipping on the tea I'd made for us. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I'm thinking of selling the house. There are too many memories here. I need a fresh start." "That sounds like a good idea," she said. "A new place, new memories." "Yeah," I mused, gazing out of the kitchen window. "I want to travel too, see the places Grandma and I always talked about." "That's wonderful, Emily. It's what you deserve," Sarah encouraged. I smiled, feeling a flicker of excitement at the thought. "It is, isn't it? I spent so long living for someone else, trying to be what James wanted. It's time I lived for myself." Sarah reached across the table, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "You've got this. And who knows, maybe along the way, you'll find someone who loves you for you." "I hope so. But for now, I'm okay with being by myself," I said, feeling a strength within me that I hadn't felt in years. "You're stronger than you know, Emily. And this fresh start is just the beginning for you," Sarah said with a knowing nod. The timer on the oven dinged then, breaking our conversation. As I stood to get the casserole out, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter with James was over, but my story was far from finished. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought of Grandma, of her strength and her love. She had wanted me to be happy, to be cared for. In the end, I realized the person who needed to care for me the most was myself. And with that realization, I knew that no matter where I went or what I did, I would be okay. My name is Olivia. I'm a 30-year-old woman who loves numbers and planning. I have a good job and a stable life. People always said I was good with numbers. This skill has helped me a lot in life. But everything changed when I met Michael. I first saw Michael at a party. I don't usually go to parties, but my friend Sarah convinced me. "Come on, Olivia, you need to get out more," she had said. At the party, I was standing alone, holding a drink, when Michael walked up to me. He was tall and had a smile that made people feel at ease. "Hi, I'm Michael. I don't think we've met," he said, extending his hand. I shook his hand. "I'm Olivia." "So, Olivia, what brings you here?" he asked. I shrugged. "My friend dragged me here. I'm not much of a party person." "Neither am I," Michael laughed. "But sometimes it's good to get out of your comfort zone." We talked for a while. Michael was easy to talk to. He listened to me and made me laugh. He told me about his job at a local bookstore and his love for old movies. I told him about my job as an accountant and my love for puzzles. As the night went on, we found ourselves sitting away from the crowd, lost in our conversation. It was strange. We were so different, yet we connected so easily. When the party ended, Michael asked for my number. "I'd like to see you again, Olivia. Maybe we can go for coffee?" I hesitated, but then nodded. "Sure, that would be nice." We started seeing each other after that night. We went on dates, watched movies, and talked for hours. Michael was charming and kind. He made me feel special. But there was one thing that bothered me. Michael didn't plan much. He lived in the moment, which was the opposite of me. I love to plan everything. It made me feel in control. One day, I brought this up. "Michael, don't you think you should plan more? It's important to have a plan." Michael just smiled. "Olivia, I like the way I live. Planning is good, but sometimes you have to just go with the flow." I didn't understand it, but I liked him too much to argue. Months passed, and our relationship grew stronger. One evening, Michael took me to a quiet spot by the river. It was a beautiful night. The stars were out, and the air was fresh. "Olivia," Michael said, turning to me, "I love you. I know we're different, but I think that's what makes us special. Will you marry me?" I was shocked. Marriage was a big step, but looking into Michael's eyes, I saw sincerity and love. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you," I said, and that's how my life took a turn. I, Olivia, the woman who loved numbers and planning, was going to marry Michael, the charming, easygoing man who lived in the moment. It was unexpected, but sometimes life is like that. It surprises you when you least expect it. When Michael and I decided to get married, I imagined a small wedding, just close family and friends, a simple ceremony, and maybe a dinner afterward. But things didn't go as I had imagined. We met each other's parents to share the news. My parents liked Michael right away. "He's a simple, honest man," my dad said, shaking Michael's hand. Michael's parents, on the other hand, seemed relieved. "It's good you found someone serious," his mom, Margaret, said with a sigh. As we started planning the wedding, Michael and I sat down with our parents. "I was thinking of a small wedding," I began, looking at Michael for support. He nodded in agreement, but Margaret had other ideas. "Oh no, dear. Michael is our only son. We must have a big wedding. All our friends and family should come. It needs to be grand." I tried to protest, but Margaret, that's not what we want. Michael, however, didn't support me. "Mom knows best, Olivia. Let's do what she wants." So the wedding planning began. It was nothing like what I had wanted. The guest list kept growing. Strangers I had never met were invited. The venue was huge, the decorations were extravagant, and everything was over the top. One day, while tasting cakes, I tried to talk to Michael. "This is too much, Michael. This isn't what we wanted." But Michael just shrugged. "It's just one day, Olivia. Let's make everyone happy. The wedding day arrived. I stood in a dressing room, wearing a dress that was too big and too fancy. Sarah was there, trying to cheer me up. You look beautiful, Olivia. I forced a smile. Thanks, Sarah. I just wish this was different. As I walked down the aisle, I saw so many faces, most of which I didn't recognize. The ceremony was a blur. I said, I do, but my heart was heavy. The reception was even worse. Loud music, too many people, and Margaret hovering around, making sure everything was as she wanted. At one point, I stepped outside for some air. Michael found me. Hey, are you okay? He asked. I looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. This isn't what I wanted, Michael. This isn't us. Michael took my hand. I know, Olivia, but it's just one day. We have our whole lives ahead of us. I wanted to believe him, but standing there, surrounded by a celebration that felt more like an ordeal, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake. I loved Michael, but our wedding, something that was supposed to be about us, had turned into something unrecognizable. And that worried me. The days after the wedding were supposed to be happy, but they weren't. Michael and I settled into our new life, but something had changed. And then, Margaret came into the picture in a way I hadn't expected. It was a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Margaret standing there with a suitcase. Margaret, what a surprise. Is everything okay? I asked, confused. Oh dear, I thought Michael told you. I'm staying with you for a while. My house is being renovated, she said, pushing past me. I was stunned. Michael hadn't mentioned anything. I called him at work. Michael, why didn't you tell me your mom was staying with us? Oh, I forgot. It's just for a few weeks, Olivia. It's not a big deal, he said casually. But it was a big deal. Margaret didn't just stay with us. She took over our lives. She had opinions on everything, what we ate, how we cleaned, and especially how we spent our money. One evening, I came home to find Margaret sitting at the kitchen table with our bills spread out in front of her. What are you doing, Margaret? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm looking at your expenses. You're spending too much. As a family, we need to save, she said, not looking up. I was shocked. Margaret, these are our personal finances. It's not your place. Margaret finally looked at me. As your mother-in-law and an elder, it is my place. I'm just trying to help. I wanted to argue, but I knew it wouldn't help. I walked away, feeling frustrated and invaded. The situation got worse. Margaret criticized everything I did. One Saturday, I was making breakfast when she walked into the kitchen. You're making pancakes? That's too many carbs. You should make something healthier, she said, frowning. I took a deep breath. Margaret, I appreciate your concern, but I can make my own decisions about what I eat. She tutted. I'm just saying, a wife should take care of her health. I felt my anger rising, but before I could say anything, Michael walked in. What's going on? He asked. Your mother is telling me how to cook now, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Michael looked uncomfortable. Mom, maybe you should let Olivia do her thing. Margaret rolled her eyes. Fine, but don't blame me if things go wrong. That night, I tried to talk to Michael. I can't live like this. Your mother is controlling everything. Michael sighed. She's just trying to help Olivia. She's old and set in her ways. But this is our home, Michael. We should make our own decisions, I argued. Michael didn't say anything. He just went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had reached my limit with Margaret's constant meddling and criticism, especially regarding our finances. It was time to take a stand. One evening, as we all sat in the living room, I decided to bring up the subject. Margaret, I've been thinking, I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. How about we do an experiment? For 1 month, let's keep separate budgets for our expenses. Then we can compare and see who's more efficient with money. Margaret raised an eyebrow. An experiment? Interesting. You think you can manage better than me? I nodded. Yes, I do. Michael looked uneasy. Olivia, is this necessary? Yes, Michael, it is. I think it's a fair challenge, I said firmly. Margaret smiled, almost smugly. All right, dear. Challenge accepted. So, The battle of budgets began. I kept meticulous records of every penny I spent, making sure to be as efficient as possible. Meanwhile, I noticed Michael sneaking extra cash from the joint account, but I didn't say anything. The month flew by, and soon it was time to compare our expenses. We sat down at the dining table, each with our records. "Let's see what you've got, Olivia," Margaret said, a confident smile on her face. I laid out my documents, showing every transaction and bill. "As you can see, I've managed to save quite a bit this month, even with all the regular expenses." Margaret looked over the papers, her smile fading slightly. "Not bad, but let's see what Michael has." Michael cleared his throat. "Well, I didn't spend much. Just the usual stuff." I decided it was time to reveal what I knew. "Michael, what about the extra money you took from our joint account?" Michael's face turned red. I needed it for some personal things." I pulled out the bank statements from the joint account. "Here's the proof. Your spending was higher than mine this month." Margaret's face was a mix of surprise and anger. "Michael, you lied? Why?" Michael didn't have an answer. He just looked down, embarrassed. I turned to Margaret. "As you can see, I'm quite capable of managing our finances efficiently." Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she looked up, her expression hard. "Fine, you've made your point. But this doesn't change anything. I still believe I know what's best for this family." I let out a sigh. It was a small victory, but I knew the battle was far from over. Margaret's control over our lives was still a problem, and Michael's lack of support was even more concerning. But at least I had proven my point. I was good with numbers, and I knew how to manage money. It was a start, but I knew there were more challenges ahead. The air was tense after the budget challenge. Margaret's attitude towards me hadn't improved, and Michael was still avoiding any confrontation. I knew something had to give, and soon it did, but not in the way I expected. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen making coffee when Margaret walked in, her expression stern. "Olivia, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. I turned to face her. "Okay, Margaret, what's on your mind?" "It's about your attitude towards money. You're too controlling, too greedy. It's not healthy," she accused. I was taken aback. "Greedy? Margaret, I'm just trying to be responsible with our finances." Margaret shook her head. "No, you're hoarding. You don't want to share. You don't understand what it means to be part of a family." I felt my frustration rising. "That's not true. I work hard for my money, and I think it's fair to want to manage it wisely." Before I could say more, Michael walked in. "What's going on?" "Your wife," Margaret said, turning to him. "She's too obsessed with money. It's not right." Michael looked at me, then at his mother. "Olivia, maybe you should ease up a bit. Mom has a point." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Michael, you're taking her side? After all the evidence I showed you?" Michael shrugged. "I just think we should all get along." That was the last straw. I stormed out of the kitchen and went to our home office. I pulled out the documents I had been keeping, proof of all the money Michael had been giving to Margaret without my knowledge. I gathered everything and went back to the kitchen. "Okay, you want to talk about money? Let's talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. I laid out the documents on the table. Bank statements, receipts, everything. "Here's proof of all the money Michael has been giving you, Margaret, most of it from my earnings." Margaret's face turned red. "That's none of your business. He's my son, and he's helping his mother." I looked at Michael. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Michael looked away. "I just wanted to help her." I turned back to Margaret. "And what about the wedding? You wanted a grand affair. Who do you think paid for that? It was me, against my wishes." Margaret was silent, her mouth a tight line. I took a deep breath. I've had enough. This is not how a family should be. I work hard for my money, and I won't be accused of being greedy or controlling for wanting to manage it responsibly. Margaret looked at me, her eyes cold. "So what are you going to do?" I met her gaze. "I'm going to think about what's best for me. This can't go on." With that, I left the room. I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and sadness. My marriage was crumbling, and the family I had hoped to be part of was nothing like I had imagined. It was time to make some tough decisions. But for the moment, I just needed some space to think and to breathe. The house felt colder, the walls seemed to echo my thoughts. I spent the next few days mostly in silence, contemplating my next steps. I knew a conversation with Michael was inevitable, and it came sooner than I expected. It was a quiet evening. Michael walked into the living room where I was sitting, a determined look on his face. "We need to talk, Olivia," he said. I nodded. "Yes, we do." He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking, and I've made a decision." I waited, my heart pounding. "I want things to go back to how they were. I want to spend my money how I like." "I don't want to argue about it anymore," he said. I looked at him, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Michael, it's not just about the money. It's about respect, trust, and partnership. We're supposed to be in this together." He shook his head. "I can't live like this, constantly being questioned and judged. So, I'm giving you an ultimatum. Let me spend without restraint, or we get a divorce." His words hit me like a punch. I felt a mix of disbelief and clarity. "You're giving me an ultimatum?" "Yes," he said firmly. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "Okay, Michael. If that's how you see our marriage, then I agree to the divorce." He seemed taken aback. "You agree? Just like that?" I stood up, feeling a sense of resolve. "Yes, just like that. I won't be part of a marriage where my partner doesn't respect me or our future together. I deserve better." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Olivia, are you sure?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm sure. I want a partner who stands with me, not against me. And clearly, that's not you." Michael didn't say anything more. He just turned and left the room. I sat back down, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control of my life. The ultimatum was meant to corner me, but instead, it had set me free. The house felt different after Michael left, quiet, empty, but it was a space I was ready to reclaim. I began by reorganizing, rearranging furniture, and redecorating. It was therapeutic, a way of wiping the slate clean. One evening, while sorting through old photographs, my phone rang. It was Sarah, a dear friend I hadn't seen in months. "Olivia, how are you holding up?" Sarah's voice was warm, laced with concern. "I'm managing, Sarah. Just taking it one day at a time," I replied. "I can't believe Michael did that. And his mom?" "I never trusted her," Sarah added. I let out a soft laugh. "You and me both. But it's over now. I'm focusing on what's ahead." "You're so strong, Olivia. Hey, why don't we catch up soon? It's been too long," Sarah suggested. "That sounds perfect. Let's do it." I agreed, feeling a flicker of excitement. We met the next evening at a cozy cafe, a place brimming with memories. Sarah's presence was comforting, a reminder of life beyond my recent troubles. "Olivia, I'm so proud of you. You're handling this like a champ," Sarah said as we sipped our coffee. I shrugged modestly. "I don't have a choice, Sarah. I refuse to let this break me." "You're amazing. Remember, I'm always here if you need anything," she said, squeezing my hand across the table. I smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Sarah. That means the world to me." Life gradually regained its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, found solace in quiet evenings with books, and poured myself into my work. I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece. Then one day, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Olivia, I want to apologize. Can we talk?" His voice was unsteady. I hesitated, but answered, "Go ahead, Michael." I was wrong, terribly wrong. Living with my mom, it's impossible. She's never satisfied, and I can't keep up with her demands. I don't have enough money. I need to come back home, Olivia, he pleaded. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "Michael, I accepted your apology, but it changes nothing. We had our time, and it's over now. I've moved on." "Olivia, please, I cut him off. "No, Michael. This is my life, and I'm not going back to how things were. Take care of yourself." Hanging up, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had picked up the pieces of my shattered life, and I wasn't about to scatter them again. I was whole, on my own, and that was all I needed. Months had passed since the divorce finalized, and each day felt like a step forward. The journey hadn't been easy, but it was mine, and I cherished every bit of it. My life had taken a turn, but I was in control now, steering it in a direction that felt right. One afternoon, as I sat in my office crunching numbers, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. "Hey Liv, how about dinner tonight? Just the two of us." I smiled and quickly typed a response. "Sounds great, Dad. See you tonight." Dinner with my dad was always special. He was the one who taught me to be strong, independent. We met at our favorite diner, a place that felt like home. As we settled into our booth, Dad looked at me with his kind eyes. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" "I'm good, Dad. Really, I am. It's been tough, but I'm finding my way," I answered honestly. He nodded. "You're strong, Olivia. Always have been. I'm proud of you." We talked about work, about life, about everything and nothing. It was comforting, familiar. Later that week, I was at the grocery store when I bumped into an old acquaintance, Emily. We had lost touch over the years, but seeing her felt like a pleasant surprise. "Olivia, it's been ages. How are you?" Emily greeted me with a warm smile. "Hey, Emily, I'm doing well, thanks. Life's been interesting," I replied with a chuckle. We chatted for a while, catching up on old times. Before parting ways, Emily said, "You seem different, Olivia. More at peace, I guess." I thought for a moment. I guess I am. It took a while, but I'm finally in a good place. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I had reclaimed my life, my space. I indulged in hobbies I had long forgotten, spent time with friends, and found joy in the little things. One evening, as I sat on my porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, walked by. She was an elderly lady, always kind and observant. "Good evening, Olivia. You seem happy these days," she remarked, leaning on her walking stick. I smiled at her. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson. Yes, I am happy. It took some time, but I'm there." She nodded approvingly. "Good for you, dear. Happiness is something we all deserve." As she walked away, I sat there, soaking in the calm of the evening. The journey had been long, filled with ups and downs. But as I looked back, I realized that every step, every stumble had led me here. I had lost a husband and a troublesome mother-in-law, but in return, I gained something far more precious, myself. I was complete, just as I was. A calculator in my head and a heart resilient enough to start anew.
It was just another shift at the hospital. My name's Eliza Bennett, a 40-year-old ER nurse who's seen it all. I like my job, even though it's tough sometimes. The hospital's short on specialists, so I often pull double duty, working in the ER and wherever else I'm needed. Tonight, I was in the ER, same as always. My husband, Michael, well, he's been busy building his political career, working as an assistant to the mayor. We don't talk much about my work. He's not too interested. We've been living our separate lives under the same roof, each absorbed in our own worlds. We never had kids. I wanted them for a long time, but it just didn't happen. Eventually, Michael told me he was fine without children. He said he liked the quiet, so it's just been the two of us, living in a kind of silent agreement. The ER was buzzing with the usual chaos, nurses and doctors rushing around, the constant beeping of machines. I was checking on a patient when I heard the ambulance siren. It was a call from a residential area, something about a sick baby. I've always had a soft spot for kids, so I volunteered to go. My colleague, John, was driving the ambulance. He's a good guy, always has a joker ready to lighten the mood. We've worked together for years. "Ready for another adventure, Elisa?" John asked as we hopped into the ambulance. "Always," I replied with a half smile. We chatted about trivial things on the way, the weather, a new restaurant in town. It was a way to keep the tension at bay, to stay calm before facing whatever awaited us. The address led us to a fancy neighborhood, the kind where each house looked like it could be on a postcard. John whistled as we pulled up to a large, well-lit house. "Someone's doing well for themselves," he commented. I just nodded, grabbing my medical bag. We were met at the door by a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She was holding a baby, and I could see the worry etched on her face. "Please, help my baby. He's got a fever, and he won't stop crying," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "Let's take a look," I said, trying to sound reassuring. Her mother, an older woman with kind eyes, stood by her side. I could see where the young woman got her looks. They led us into a spacious living room where I began examining the baby. I didn't know it then, but that night was going to change everything. My ordinary life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. As I examined the baby, I could tell something was wrong. He was burning up with fever and seemed to be having spasms. I needed to act fast. "John, we need to cool him down now," I said urgently. John nodded, quickly understanding the situation. "Got it, Eliza. I'll get some ice packs and a cool cloth." While John fetched the supplies, I turned to the young woman. "I'm Eliza. What's your baby's name?" She was on the verge of tears. "His name is Liam. He was fine this afternoon, and then suddenly—" "It's okay," I said gently. "We're going to take care of Liam." John came back with the ice packs and a cloth. We worked together, trying to bring down Liam's fever. The young woman, who I learned was named Sophia, and her mother watched us, anxiety written all over their faces. "Is he going to be okay?" Sophia's mother asked. She was trying to stay strong, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "We're doing everything we can," I assured her. After a few tense minutes, Liam's fever started to come down. He stopped convulsing and began to calm. Relief washed over Sophia's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "We should still get him to a hospital to be checked over," I suggested. "Better safe than sorry." Sophia nodded. "Of course, whatever he needs." As we prepared to move Liam, the front door opened. I didn't pay it much attention until I heard a familiar voice. "What's going on here? Sophia, are you okay?" I froze. That voice. I'd know it anywhere. It was Michael, my husband. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing in the doorway. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Eliza, what are you doing here?" Michael's voice was a mix of surprise and something else. Fear, maybe. "I could ask you the same question," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Sophia looked from Michael to me and back again. "You two know each other?" Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Eliza is my wife," he finally managed to say. I confirmed, "Yes, I am his wife." The room went silent. Sophia's eyes widened, and her mother let out a gasp. I could feel John's eyes on me, full of questions. "Your wife?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. She looked at Michael, hurt and confusion written all over her face. Michael didn't answer. He just stood there, looking like he wished the ground would swallow him up. In that moment, I realized my ordinary life was over. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The room was thick with tension. I couldn't believe Michael was here, in this house, with Sophia and her baby. I felt like I was in some kind of bad dream. Sophia was the first to break the silence. "Michael, why is she calling you her husband?" Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, I can explain." "Explain?" Sophia's voice rose. "Explain why my baby's nurse is claiming to be your wife." I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath. "Because I am his wife. We've been married for 10 years. Sophia's face crumpled. "But you told me you were divorced." Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking desperate. I know, and I'm sorry. I was going to tell you, You just what? Sophia's mother cut in, her voice sharp. Lied to my daughter, to us? John, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Maybe we should give you some space to talk this out. I nodded, grateful for his intervention. Yes, we should go. Liam's stable, but he still needs to be seen at the hospital. As John and I started to move Liam's carrier, the front door opened again. Another surprise. This time, an older man walked in. I recognized him immediately. Mayor Thomas Harrington, Michael's boss. What's all this commotion? The mayor asked, looking around the room. Sophia rushed to him. Dad, this is complicated. The mayor's eyes landed on Michael. Michael, what's going on? Before Michael could respond, Sophia blurted out, Michael's married, Dad, and he lied to me about it. The mayor's expression turned from confusion to anger. Married? Is this true, Michael? Michael nodded, unable to meet the mayor's gaze. Yes, sir, it's true. I could see the wheels turning in the mayor's head. And you're his wife? He asked, looking at me. Yes, I am, I confirmed. The mayor shook his head. I can't believe this. Michael, you've been working for me for over a year, and I had no idea. Michael tried to say something, but the mayor held up a hand to stop him. Save it. I need some time to process this. Sophia was crying now, her mother comforting her. The mayor looked at his daughter and granddaughter with a mixture of sadness and anger. I felt like I was watching everything from a distance. This was my life falling apart, but it felt like a scene from a TV show. As John and I finally left the house with Liam, I couldn't help but glance back. Michael was standing there looking lost. Part of me felt sorry for him, but another part of me was angry, so very angry. I had no idea what was going to happen next. All I knew was that my ordinary life was gone, replaced by something much messier and more complicated. After dropping Liam off at the hospital and making sure he was in good hands, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. I needed answers. I needed to talk to Michael. I drove home, my mind racing. When I got there, Michael's car was in the driveway. I took a deep breath and went inside. Michael was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like he hadn't moved since he got home. He looked up when I came in, his expression a mix of guilt and fear. Eliza, He started, but trailed off. I sat down across from him. I want to know everything, Michael. How long has this been going on? Why did you lie to her? To me? Michael took a deep breath. It started a year ago, at a work event. I met Sophia and we hit it off. I know I should have told her the truth, but I saw an opportunity. Opportunity? I couldn't hide the hurt in my voice. With her being the mayor's daughter, I thought... He paused, struggling to find the words. I thought it could help my career. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. So, our marriage, our life together, it meant nothing to you? It's not like that, Eliza. I do care about you, but I felt stuck. I thought I needed more. And a baby. Did you plan that too? My voice was rising now, anger mixing with the hurt. No, that was an accident. But when Sophia told me, I thought maybe it could all work out. I could have this new life. A new life? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And what about our life? What about me? Michael looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know. I thought maybe we could get a divorce, and it would be better for both of us. So, you were just going to leave me? After 10 years? I was going to talk to you about it. I just needed to figure things out first. I shook my head, feeling a mix of sadness and disbelief. You were going to leave me and marry her, weren't you? Michael didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I knew the truth. I can't believe this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe you would do this to me. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I never meant to hurt you." "Sorry doesn't fix this, Michael. You've lied to me, to Sophia, to everyone, and now everything's falling apart." Michael looked like he wanted to say more, but I stood up. "I need some time to think, to figure out what I'm going to do." As I walked away, I could feel Michael's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, but my mind was elsewhere. Michael tried to talk to me, but I couldn't deal with it. Not yet. Then, one evening, I found myself at Sophia's doorstep. I needed to talk to her, to understand her side of the story. I rang the bell, and after a moment, she opened the door. "Eliza?" Sophia looked surprised to see me. "I think we need to talk," I said. She hesitated, but then nodded, stepping aside to let me in. We sat down in her living room, an awkward silence hanging in the air. "Why are you here?" Sophia finally asked. "I want to understand. What did Michael tell you about us?" Sophia took a deep breath. "He said he was divorced, that he'd been single for a while. I had no idea about you until you showed up that night." I nodded, feeling a pang of sadness. "And the baby? Liam?" She looked down, tears welling in her eyes. "He was a surprise. Michael said we could be a family, that he wanted to be there for us. I believed him." I could hear the pain in her voice, and despite everything, I felt sorry for her. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry he lied to both of us." She wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry too. I never wanted to be part of something like this." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. "Did you love him?" I asked, not sure if I wanted to know the answer. Sophia looked up, her expression sad. "I thought I did. But now, I don't know what to believe. He lied about everything." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Yeah, I get that." We talked for a while longer, sharing our stories, our confusion, our pain. It was strange, talking like this with the other woman, but it was also comforting in a way. When I left, I felt a little lighter, like I'd let go of some of the anger and hurt. It wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but it was a start. As I drove home, I thought about Michael, about our marriage, about everything that had happened. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. I needed to make a decision, for my sake and for my future. The weeks following the revelation of Michael's betrayal felt like a stormy sea, each day tossing me between waves of anger, disbelief, and an unexpected sense of liberation. As I braced myself for the legal battles ahead, the reality of the situation became crystal clear. It was me and Mayor Harrington versus Michael. The day of the trial dawned like any other, but with a weight that felt like a heavy cloud hanging over me. Walking into the courtroom, I was a mix of nerves and determination. Mayor Harrington gave me a nod of solidarity as we took our seats. The courtroom buzzed with the quiet chatter of spectators and the shuffling of papers. When Michael walked in, escorted by his lawyer, my heart raced. He avoided eye contact, but I could feel the tension between us. The trial began with the mayor's case. His lawyer presented evidence of Michael's deception, how he had lied about being divorced and manipulated Sophia, the mayor's daughter. Photographs, texts, and emails painted a clear picture of Michael's duplicity. Mayor Harrington himself took the stand, his disappointment and anger toward Michael evident in his testimony. Sophia also testified, her voice trembling as she recounted the lies Michael had fed her. Then, it was my turn. My lawyer laid out the case against Michael, highlighting his infidelity and deceit. I took the stand, my hands shaking slightly. The lawyer asked me to recount how I discovered Michael's affair and the events that followed. "As a nurse, I am trained to stay calm in emergencies," I began, my voice steady. But nothing could have prepared me for the shock of finding my husband with another woman and a child he had kept hidden from me. The courtroom was silent, hanging on my every word. I spoke about our marriage, the struggles, and how Michael's ambition had slowly overshadowed our relationship. When it was Michael's turn, his defense seemed weak. His lawyer tried to downplay the situation, suggesting misunderstandings and miscommunications. But the evidence was overwhelming. Michael himself stumbled through his testimony, his excuses sounding hollow and insincere. As the trial proceeded, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. For years, I had lived in the shadow of Michael's ambitions, but here, in this courtroom, I was reclaiming my life. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. Michael was found guilty of fraud and deceit in both cases. There was a murmur in the courtroom, a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. As we exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed around, but I declined to comment. This victory was not about public attention. It was personal, a step towards healing and moving on. Driving home, the weight of the past weeks began to lift. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. The trial had not just been about legal justice, it was a journey to self-discovery and reclaiming the narrative of my own life. That evening, as I sat quietly at home, I realized the trial was more than a closure. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was not just a spectator in my life, but the author of my own story. The trial was over, but its ripples were still felt in every corner of my life. The legal victory was clear, but the emotional landscape was more complicated. I had won, but at what cost? The weeks following the trial were a blur. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the routine of my shifts at the hospital. It was during one of these shifts that I ran into Sophia, the mayor's daughter, in the hospital corridor. "Hey," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting a shared understanding of pain and betrayal. "Hi, Sophia," I replied. "How are you holding up?" "It's been tough," she admitted, cradling her baby in her arms. "But I'm managing. And you?" "Day by day," I said, offering a small smile. "Taking it day by day." We exchanged a few more words before parting ways, a silent acknowledgement of the strange bond that now linked us. Back at home, the loneliness of the empty house sometimes felt overwhelming. I had grown used to Michael's absence, but the finality of the divorce brought a new kind of solitude. It was during these quiet moments that I would often find myself reflecting on the past, on the choices I had made, and the ones that had been made for me. One evening, as I was sorting through old papers, I came across an envelope addressed to me. It was from Michael. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. As I read his letter, his words of apology and explanation felt empty. He talked about his mistakes, his regrets, and his desire to make things right. But it was too little, too late. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash, feeling a surge of anger, and then, surprisingly, a sense of release. Michael was part of my past, but he would not define my future. A few days later, I received a call from Mayor Harrington. He wanted to meet for coffee, to thank me personally for my courage during the trial. Sitting across from him in the small cafe, I felt a sense of respect for the man who had stood by his daughter and supported me through the legal ordeal. "Thank you for meeting me, Eliza," he said, his voice sincere. "Your strength during the trial was admirable." "I did what I had to do," I replied, stirring my coffee, "for myself and for Sophia. I want you to know that the City Council is here to support you," he continued. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out." I nodded, appreciative of his offer, but determined to stand on my own 2 feet. As I walked back home, I realized that the aftermath of the trial was not just about picking up the pieces, it was about building something new. My marriage to Michael had ended, but my life was still very much in progress. In the following weeks, I made a conscious decision to focus on myself. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and even began considering furthering my education in nursing. The journey was not easy. There were days of doubt and moments of loneliness. But there was also a newfound sense of freedom and possibility. I was no longer tied to Mikhail's ambitions or his betrayals. I was my own person, with my own path to forge. As I look back on that tumultuous time, I realize that the aftermath was not just about recovering from a betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I wanted out of life. It was about learning to stand alone, not as a victim, but as a survivor, ready to face whatever the future might hold.